Hello everybody, Glitch Reaper here. I'm gonna do something a little bit different for this episode of Magic Duels, because, I'm kind of transitioning a bit, and I'm pondering where all I'm gonna go with this, and I'll definitely be doing more Magic Duels in the future with things like maybe some random matches, whether it be against the computer or other players, which is a big part of things. So you can actually do both and gain, well, in-game currency, actually. And that's what this is about, is how to do quests. Now, some of them are online only, and some are things you can do in single player, and now that I know how to work it properly with quests that are, well, meant for the story missions, then I can kind of go over this in better detail now. But the thing is, there was kind of a glitch that kind of kept me from showing that for a while, because I didn't realize exactly how it worked. But it turns out the story mission quests do work. You just have to restart the game for it to track your money, which I think is kind of funny. Now, you'll also note here that there's no community quest. And that's not just because it's been done, it's because it hasn't been serviced for a while. That's right, I don't know if that feature is even working anymore. It's kind of disturbing to me, because I used to use those for a lot of things, and they had a lot in common with the other quests, in that sometimes you could do things in single player, and sometimes it had to be multiplayer. But what I'm focusing on here is things you can do in single player with quests, including how to kind of find the best spots in the story mode to do it, because the story mode is set now. It's not going to be updated or changed. This game still has an active online community. It still has its multiplayer supported, but it just doesn't seem to have anything further being serviced because of MTG Arena. So that's where a lot of the action is right now. So they're not debugging the game anymore. They're not doing community quests, or at least I don't think so, because I haven't had one active for a while, as I was saying before. And I find that a little upsetting, because for a good part of time into MTG Arena already, they had been still supporting this game specifically, including the community quests. Now they're only having it pretty much on just, well, if you have it, you can connect online to other players if you want to. But that's basically it, is it still has the online multiplayer. But I think that might just be kind of auto-supported through the way it works on Steam. Anyhow, I'll be going now into the bulk of what this video is about, and that's how to kind of cheese the system when it comes to quests. Because the thing is, now that I know exactly how this works out, I can kind of tell you a few tips. And I'm not going to be able to show off all the quests at one time right now, because they do change periodically. They're kind of referred to as a daily quest as well, because you will get one of these slots filled every day, and they'll last until you get it fulfilled, or you decide to switch it out. Like, I can hit this button right now and swap out this quest for another one. It might be one that you can do in single player, it might be one that's multiplayer only, but I could swap it out. Community quests, while they were still working, you couldn't swap out. It was just something that was designated for the whole community to get, like, some bonus money if the community kind of came together and did it. And usually it was something where it would just kind of automatically be tracked across all players, so it added up pretty fast. But yes, some of them not as much. But here, this is where it's at for you individually. This is where you can go in with single player and multiplayer quests to get extra in-game currency, to get your packs, to get maybe a few cosmetics here and there, and other things. But everything in this game you can do basically by grinding out quests in one way or another to get money for it. And that's in-game money. It's not like you don't ever actually have to pay anything on this game in, like, real-world money, so to speak. There's something special about it, is you've never really had to pay anything. You could speed it up with it, yeah, but you never had to actually pay anything to get everything that's in it. And that's really cool. I could eventually collect the whole game just by doing things like this. And there's a few things I found to kind of cheese it, like you may notice here, that it has win 2 games in which you cast a blue or black Darn Lips. Win 2 games in which you cast a blue or black spell, and that's for Champion of the Drowned Catacomb. This one's a similar one, in which case you have to cast either a red or green spell. Now, there's ways to kind of cheese those, because they just say win those games. It's not where it has to be online multiplayer, so you can even do that in the quest, and that counts for anything with those colors. And even just the first line of quest and story mode, whenever you're its origins, Well, the thing about Origins is each Planeswalker has their own dedicated color. Like with Gideon Jura, he's all white. With Jace Beleren, he's all blue. With Liliana Vesh, she's all black. With Chandra Nalaar, she's all red. And with Nissa Ravain, she's all green. So you can tell where one of those colors are. And that's something that sometimes you might not get in multiplayer or even in some later quests, is the guarantee of getting one of those two colors. Because if you're playing a bicolor deck or greater, there's a chance that the RNG goes weird and you wind up only playing one color, which might not be the one you need. So, like if you're playing white and black and your quest says for black or red, what if it only comes up red? Then you're not playing white or black. So, having a solution where you know you got a reliable color is a big deal. And that's something where you can actually use the quest to kind of guarantee yourself a bit. Now, there is a downside to using quests to get your money this way, in that if you're... Here's where I'm going to show a little something else. Battle mode. If you're doing it as solo, which is against the computer, you will get some money at different levels of the game, and it's kind of better to run on medium-ish. Although you can also run on hard mode, or easy, whichever one you prefer. But medium's kind of considered where it's mainly at what's considered the primary difficulty of the game anyhow. But the big deal is every match you win against the computer, which you're doing here in the solo version of battle mode, you'll be able to get some money corresponding to that difficulty level, in addition to anything you're doing from quests. So basically, if you're doing it in the story missions, however, they'll only give you money for completing it once for that particular mission, and that's it. And that's the only bonus money you get. If you will get progress in story missions for your quests, but then that's only that. So doing it in solo battle does have the advantage of giving you extra money on top of what you're getting for your designated quests. So that's something to kind of consider, that you might go over that way. But it can be very unreliable sometimes, especially if you're trying to go with certain very specific goals that aren't the ones that were shown right there, and ones I will be describing over this, because I'll be kind of showing off the best places for them. So the whole color-coded ones, as I said, it's easy to just go with anything that you know that color in advance, especially if it's a pure color like with the Origins 5. Another name for the 5 Planeswalkers that eventually form the Gatewatch. So Origins is good for if you're going for a pure color, but you might have a favorite out of the rest of the whole thing. And this is where we're also going to get into some interesting other quests and things. Now, one that I find kind of popular to do, that I'll personally do myself rather than relying on the quests, is Gravedigger, where you have to get so many creatures to exit your graveyard to fulfill the quest. I think it's 10 or so. And the thing is, there is a good quest for that if you're not good at designing a deck around resurrecting creatures. And that's in Jace Beleren's. Here, the last one, whenever you face Alhamret. The thing is, as you may recall from my earlier duel with him, is that you can get a very special card, and you can guarantee that in a way. Like, you can just keep resetting until you have that in your opening hand. And the thing is, he doesn't have any card that will force you to discard a card and have him choose it or anything like that. So you can be guaranteed that that's basically safe in your hand until you're ready to use it. He does have some counters, but they're mostly against creatures. And because of how expensive a Psychic Spiral is to cast, he'll probably have exhausted most of his generic counters by the time that you get to actually use it. And the thing about Psychic Spiral is it takes cards from your graveyard, puts them back onto your library, and forces them to discard to take that many cards from their library and put it into their graveyard. So while you refresh, they lose a deck, and that's basically how you usually finish off Alhamret. But the thing about it is, unlike some other quests, you are very, and for that matter, general deck designs, it is very, very loaded with creatures. So there's a good chance that if most of your library is in your graveyard at the time, and you finish off with Psychic Spiral, that you will probably have at least 10 creatures that will suddenly be removed from the graveyard, and that will fill a quest in one shot. So you could do that in one big run when it comes to this fight, and that's a pretty cool thing about it. Again, I like doing it manually in other ways, but that's me, mainly because I have a deck that's heavily designed around resurrecting creatures, and I like using it. It's one of my favorite decks, so that's, again, where I do it a different way, but that's how you cheese it, is with that particular fight. Now, there's also another one called Counter Down. It's kind of generic, because you have to basically have gone through a number of turns with your creatures tapped. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because just about everything you'll do that. Like, that's something that'll happen over time. You're guaranteed to get it pulled off. But the smaller the creatures are, the better, because they'll deal less damage, and it's more of a chance of you actually, well, basically having enough rounds in fewer fights. Because that way, I mean, they deal less damage. It takes longer for them to take out 20 points of life. So it may take more than that number of rounds having creatures tapped and attacking just to basically win anyhow with smaller creatures. But again, it's something that's kind of inevitable, so you don't necessarily have to worry about cheesing it with quests, but it's kind of an option. And in which case, you can do it pretty much just doing the quests. So you might be doing that one at the same time you're doing something else that you can do with quests. So that's one to just kind of do concurrently. But there's also a few others that are very specific, and some of them I can certainly say fit in really well with the last line of quests in story mode, or with the last line of missions, I guess I could say, to distinctify that from the quests. And that is that, I mean, the last arc here, Amonkhet, is pretty fast-paced, but as they change the game over time, they kind of veered the quests more towards things you can do in Amonkhet, and that makes it really convenient to do it with the quests. Like, for example, they have one that's called Counter Down, where it's basically you place a number of -1/-1 counters on creatures you control, which is primarily an Amonkhet. And it's not, so that's something that's a dynamic specifically from the set. But because they demonstrate that in the story missions, that makes it very convenient. And I'd say the best one to do that is probably the Trial of Ambition here with Bantu. Because if you're going with that one, there's a lot, I mean, the whole theme of it is basically sacrificing others to get your ambition done. So, because you're detrimenting your creatures in exchange for trying to attack your foe, it comes in pretty heavy in this particular run, although there's a decent amount of it here with Trial of Strength. But I'd say Trial of Ambition is the biggest one with using -1/-1 counters. So you will be getting a ton of that in this mission. And I'd say it's the fastest one to do when it comes to getting countered down. It's like 15 or so -1/-1 counters. And here's an interesting ponderance about that. The thing is, certain conditions of quests can trigger whether or not they are caused by you or your opponent. So, if you're in multiplayer or against the computer, if they put a -1/-1 counter on your creature, it actually counts towards your progress, which is kind of fascinating, really. And there's a little bit of that in this trial too, and that makes it kind of doubly useful to know that this one is just a great place to do it. So, because both your creatures have it and some of theirs inflict -1/-1 counters, it gets it fulfilled doubly fast. So, it's actually quite possible to do it in one run of this mission. So that's my professional opinion on where that one's best. And again, it doesn't matter whether condition is done by your opponent or you. So if an enemy is forcefully tapping your creatures to slow them down, that actually counts towards your rounds. So if you were going to attack with a creature with vigilance, or if you weren't going to attack at all and they just decide to tap your creatures anyhow, that will count towards your progress for that round. So that goes in general, and just the fact that -1/-1 counters are treated that way is a good time to kind of talk about it here, because it's a big dynamic with how the quest system works, that it counts it regardless of who initiates it. As long as it's on your creatures, it counts. So therefore, for -1/-1 counters, this is the place to go. Now, there's a couple others that are major ones that you can do with quests, and just kind of on a side note, you can actually get a little bit of resurrection for Gravedigger here in the last one, which is Trial of Zeal with Hazoret, because you do have a card in it, which is Dread Wanderer, that can resurrect itself if you only have like one or no cards in hand, and as long as they don't exile it with a magma spray, you might be able to pull that off more than once. So that one's kind of a maybe, but I'd say that's a lot more reliable whenever you're facing Alhamret earlier. It just really is. So you might get a little multi-progress here and just get a little bit towards it while you're doing something else. And the main thing that Hazard's quest is really great for is one you'll find called Spell Mastery. This particular quest is all about using instants and sorceries, and while some earlier story missions have a good amount of them, the fact is that this is probably the fastest pace and has some of the cheapest instants and sorceries to use. And I mean that literally in terms of their converted mana cost and their actual cost and how easy it is to do it. Like a lot of them just cost 1 point of red mana, and that means it's pretty easy to get a few off. And then if you feel that it's not going your way, just quickly reset and continue. And that's another thing, is that you can use the restart duel option, and it will carry your progress over. Like, you don't have to worry about whether or not you do it in one shot. You can do it just continuously by resetting a match over and over until you get it done. And that's something that can only really be done in single player. You can't do that online. So if you're really trying to make sure that you get a quest done, that's kind of the way to do it. So there is a lot more control in single player, but it's I mean in the story missions, I should say. There's a lot more control in the story missions than there is whenever you're either going against the computer in battle mode or against other players in multiplayer. There's a little bit more control in single player against the computer because you can still restart a match. You can't do that in multiplayer, obviously, but it does give you an option, and it does carry over progress from the previous attempt. Now, one more note about Gravedigger, back on that one for a second here, is the fact that, again, it also counts if your enemy does it to you. Now, you'd think that wouldn't show up, but there are cards that have the ability to exile creatures from graveyards to keep them from coming back. And some of them might be thrown at you from an enemy. And if that happens out of your graveyard as opposed to hitting the creature directly on the battlefield, then it counts towards your quest. Then it counts towards your quest progress for Gravedigger, because then they're being removed from the graveyard. It doesn't matter how in Gravedigger. It doesn't matter whether they're returned to your hand, the battlefield, your library, or they're exiled. If they're out of the graveyard, it counts. But for just sheer number of spells, just bulk spells, you can go with Hazard with Trial of Zeal, and it's like a good number of spells to do spell mastery. It's like 25. I mean, it's pretty hard to do an instant and sorcery heavy deck that heavy these days by comparison, because kind of like the meta of the game has changed over time. It used to be that you could have a no creature deck, especially with playing solid red, and just burn your enemy out, and that would be a way you could win. But it's something that's insanely rare these days, because there's things about your cost efficiency and all sorts of stuff having to do with your spells these days. It's kind of changed a bit over time, and it's made it far less of an option to just go all out burn. So there's still a lot of cheap red spells you can do, and that's again where this quest shines. But overall, I'd say you're probably going to be resetting this one a lot to get that number, and or winning it a lot, or just going at it really hard and fast, because it's a quick-paced one. The fact that it's very fast-paced as opposed to some earlier ones makes it a lot better for using a high amount of sorceries and instants. Because, sure, you'll be casting a lot of sorceries and instants back in the Duel with Elhammerit with Jace, but it's kind of a slow-paced battle. And it's mostly about, like, countering each other and slowing each other down, so even though you're casting a lot of instants and sorceries, it's a very slow duel, so it will take you a while to get through it. So hence why I was talking about the pace of the other one being good for spell mastery, is that it's just a lot easier to do. So that's just something to kind of consider and factor in. There is the speed that it takes you to do the duel. So if you're going, especially if you're running on an actual counter, like an actual clock, like, oh, say you've only got like an hour before something's about to come on or something, then yeah, you'll probably want to consider that. So I wouldn't suggest this one for spell mastery. I'd suggest it for Gravedigger, but I would not suggest it for spell mastery, and that's where you kind of got to go with something optimal. So you kind of got to consider some of those things all over whenever you're trying to build quests with story mode. But one of the biggest things of why I'm kind of cluing you in as to some of the best places to build in story mode is kind of this. Before you get to doing your custom decks and like building up a big collection, you'll be wanting to build some money so that you can buy some packs and then build up enough to start building those custom decks so that you can actually do either battle mode in single player or multiplayer. Either one, you're going to need a sufficient level of cards to really build a deck that is able to actually seriously work. And for that, you'll be building up money, so you may be doing your quests, well, again, you got your store here, but everything costs you some coins. And as you're building that up, you'll want to be doing it in a way that's natural, so as you're progressing through the story, you'll probably be buying new things that way. And you'll want to know the best places that you can go back to and replay to get your quests done whenever you've got that option. So just kind of think about all that together when it comes to building up your first decks, because you'll be wanting to get that money as easily as possible for a while. Because the thing about story mode is absolutely everything in it uses pre-ordered, everything in it uses pre-constructed decks. And that means there's always enough to count, not always enough to pretty much win if you know what the situation is. That's not always possible whenever you're building your own deck. But you're always up against an opponent in a very particular way, and you've always got the means to win it in story mode, and that's where it gives you that safety level to build up and get your first decks built. So it's something that comes with that kind of experience, just knowing that that's how it goes. But I'm just kind of giving you that little heads up that that's probably how you're going to do your initial building before you really get to designing decks and doing it all out. So you will be not only playing for quests initially, but you'll be replaying them a few times to really build up. And I think that's pretty much everything I can say about this video, is giving you a few tips for building in story mode. So for now, I'll be logging off. Hope to hear from you all later. Bye for now, everybody. And remember, MTG forever.